So our starting point was to look at the Policing Vision 2025 and really pick up on this key phrase around the importance of protecting and reassuring communities. And also the Pelian principle of seeing police as citizens and citizens as police. And that's kind of a core thing in the project that we're trying to really try and explore how we enhance some of these features. And so that's the basis on which we undertook this work. And when we looked at the literature, what we identified are some of the issues in traditional policing efforts around power imbalances and equality, bias and prejudice, and also the opaqueness of some policies and procedures, and how this contributes to mistrust and asymmetry of the relationship between citizens and the police. And in particular, there was an assertion in association between police trustworthiness and citizens' willingness to cooperate. And so what this means is that to build trust, again, the literature identifies the importance of accountability mechanisms and shared identity to support that trust building that then supports the cooperation that benefits policing and citizens more generally. And so then the focus of our work was to look at the role of digital technologies in the space, and particularly focusing on mobile apps, which we felt were an important development in policing. And the things that the literature again identified were some positives around how digital technologies can support shared identity and scalability, flexibility, and so on, as listed on this slide. But also an increasing recognition of the negatives, so the amplification of bias in society, mistrust arising due to data protection issues, and so on. So, and what we found was that the existing technologies, the apps, are not really built on a systematic research foundation. So there's really little known about how they tackle information sharing and data protection, or whether they have safeguarding and engagement and empowering and reassurance at their core. And those are things we felt were important if we were to try and, if policing apps really aspire to supporting the principles set out in the policing vision and so on. So with that, we undertook this approach, a method where we looked at existing police citizen communication apps, and we scored them on a number of measures relating to data protection and the features of those apps. And what we found was, through that analysis, 12 we feel are important for these types of technologies. And our approach also involved comparing apps that are hosted, in other words, they are identifiably linked to a police force, versus those, there are apps in this space that are developed by third parties and don't necessarily have a direct link to a specific police force. So through that, our approach was to do some searching of the Google Play Store. So we focused on Android, partly because of the availability of data from Android Google Play apps, but also because Android is definitely the most widely used mobile operating system out there. And we used these keyword combinations around community, policing, engagement, collaboration, and so on, to extract apps that had some mention or were linked to these keywords when you searched in the Google Play Store. And we got a list of 1,207 apps. So this is the UK Google Play Store, but these apps were coming from all over the world. And we decided on a number of inclusion and exclusion criteria then to help us identify the ones we wanted to look at more closely. And the key themes were around the presence or absence of an interactive communication mechanism. So the presence of one made it an inclusion, absence made it one that we would have excluded, and the stakeholders that were involved. And the initial decision on this presence or absence of interactive communication and stakeholders were based on looking at the descriptions and information available in in the Google Play Store, so the app category and so on. And we also excluded things based on the language. So if it wasn't in English or the app was mainly a reference app or a game, we excluded it. And based on that, we ended up with 591 apps. And then we looked at the landing page of the app and did a similar exercise, and that reduced the set down to 240. And out of that 240, then we started actually looking at our ability to install and do a deeper study of these apps. And we found that about 28% couldn't be installed. There were some proportion of them that were exclusive, as in they required people to create an account or register in order to install them. So we chose not to include those. And that left us with an inclusive set of apps that we could use, and of a final sample of 64 apps. And these range from apps that were identifiably policing apps, identified with the police force, and third-party apps. And then we, the authors installed each app and then scored the app on a range of measures to do with data protection, features of the app, and we made comparisons based on the host, whether it was a police app or a third-party app. So looking at the first of these areas, informed consent, so here you'll see the N goes up a bit to 171, and this is because we could include more apps in this category because we didn't have to install the app in order to look at its privacy policy or any way of that it gathered informed consent as part of the installation process. But what we did was we took that 171 apps, privacy policies, and measured the readability of them using the Fleisch readability calculator. And what it does is gives us a basis for understanding how easy or difficult a text is to understand. And that was a way of looking at how effective the informed consent mechanism was. And what we found was that the vast majority of privacy policies associated with these apps are either difficult or very difficult to read, or there's no access to a policy available. And only 3 of the policies associated with these apps were understandable without a university level education, according to the Fleisch readability score. So that shows a significant issue that needs to be addressed in this space. And one of the things that might help here might be research that's been done in the States at Carnegie Mellon University on this notion of privacy labels. So these are more easy to understand, almost like nutrition labels for privacy features of apps. And that's something that might come about, particularly as we're seeing Apple, for example, in their latest iOS, including this notion of privacy labels from later this year. So the next thing we looked at was anonymity. And so this was the app supported anonymity and reporting of sensitive issues and their claims to do with anonymous reporting options. And they had to be made explicit before a user made a report and provide those options in order to be considered having such a reporting mechanism in our sample. And the majority of apps, 86%, had some integrated reporting mechanism, but only 55% explicitly offered anonymous reporting. And there wasn't a significant difference between that or policing apps versus third-party apps. So they're kind of equivalent in terms of their support for anonymous reporting. And what we also identified is that anonymous crime reporting is not really supported or encouraged in the UK. It's not something that can happen. But there's the kind of counterpoint to that anonymity can encourage reporting. It can elicit extra details in some sensitive situations. But there's a need to address the risk and issues around safeguarding of victims. And it's important that there are then two-way follow-ups associated with that. When it came to the features, we were looking at these 5 measures in particular. So the extent to which the app was reassuring, supported information sharing, engaging, had some kind of safeguarding features, and were empowering. So for the first of those, we looked at these 4 aspects for reassurance, and essentially an app scored 1 for each of these elements if it was part of the app's feature set. So there was a range of 0 to 4 points that could be scored, and our hypothesis was that policing apps would have more reassuring items just because of their official nature and having organizational support behind them. But what we found was that actually policing apps were not more or less likely to include such items. So there's more space for improvement here in terms of providing information that would reassure users about what the app does and how it would benefit people, and the purposes for which data is collected and used and so on. So privacy labels and feedback mechanisms could be helpful here. When it came to information sharing, again, we looked at a number of ways in which the types of information that could be shared and how many of these elements were included in an app. And there was some research suggesting that the police traditionally do one-way sharing of information with citizens. And our hypothesis here was that would be the case for policing apps as well. So we found that they were more likely to share information than third-party apps. So out of the 6 possible things, they on average shared more than 2. But the information was very top-down. So there's allowed to there was no features to update users after feedback. So if someone gave feedback on a feature, then there was no real mechanism to follow up on that. So yeah, that was some of the features that we found there. So it suggests that the policing apps are not capitalizing on really the potential of the technology in terms of supporting interaction and engagement. But we also need to be mindful and careful about the extent to which there is direct involvement of people in ongoing investigations, such as the case with the Boston bombing, where Twitter users misidentified innocent people when they were engaged at speed in a fast-moving investigation. When it came to engagement, again, we looked at a number of features and scored the apps for having these things. Again, we expected police apps to have more engaging features, supported by findings, that hypothesis that was the case. So they had at least more than 2 of the 8 possible features. And some of the interesting ones were features in the apps to support shared events where there were citizen police contributions, so community meetings and physical community engagement events and so on, that were being promoted and supported through the apps. When it came to safeguarding, there were, again, 9 features that we scored the apps on, and we thought these were important and linked to the policing vision component of protecting and making communities safer. And again, our hypothesis was that police apps would include these items, and that was the case. So we found that they were more likely to include these items than third-party apps. And then finally, looking at empowerment. So this was about looking at accountability mechanisms and actions that users could perform in order to engage with the police in different situations. So kind of emergency situations, notifying users about risk, raising awareness about rights or resources that people could access in relation to their safety and other community issues. We didn't really expect the focus of police apps to be in this area. And again, that was what the findings suggested as well. and it seemed that there was this balance between safeguarding and empowerment, the tension between them, that if apps that had more safeguarding features tended to have fewer of the features that we associated with empowering users. But there were some exceptions to this. So apps like Neighborhood Watch and GatorSafe, for example, had mechanisms for Neighborhood Watch had a comments wall that allowed users to alert others about risks in their area, and GatorSafe was a app that had a feature to allow someone to digitally walk a friend home, as in watch their GPS trace as they walked home, and act as a kind of supporter for a safe journey. So there are some exceptions. And in all of this, we have to think about the issues around surveillance and tracking, and how we don't end up with ethically dubious, unsound practices in this space. And then finally, we also looked at navigation and presentation of the app. And what we found was typically that they were quite busy, hard to use interfaces, quite a lot of clutter and confusing links, hidden navigation, and so on. So there's quite a lot that could be done to improve the usability of these apps. Also, features. These features had a link to the user ratings of the apps. So we did a multilinear regression, and what we found was that these features explained about 30% of the variance in user ratings. So apps that were easy to navigate, that we scored as being presentable, empowering, and that shared information also had the highest user ratings in the App Store. So it's important to highlight some of the limitations and restrictions to what we did in this study. So for example, we didn't actually use the reporting mechanisms that were in the apps. We didn't want to create essentially dud reports in these systems. So we only looked at the screen that allowed a user to submit a report, but we didn't go any further. So there's elements of the functionality we haven't looked at. And we measured anonymity according to the explicit state that the app were made, rather than actually or trying to capture what data they were recording or storing. So it was more about looking at the kind of stated aspiration of the app, the features that they sought to provide against the various measures, rather than always objectively measuring exactly what the app was doing due to limitations. So there are ways we can improve on that in future work. So just to wrap up, I think what we found is that even though these apps exist, they don't seem to be a mechanism for enabling police and citizens to communicate digitally in this way. There are inconsistencies in the feature set and behavior of these apps that can amplify some of the issues in community police interactions and undermine police efforts in this space. So it's really important that these apps, if they're deployed, have a community behind joined up in terms of the other digital mechanisms that police forces use to communicate with their stakeholders. The trust aspect is really important, so it should be designed to be trustworthy, and effort should be made to ensure that perception is supported. But also the recognition that these things can contribute to policing work and getting a balance between managing the demand, but also supporting people to feel more engaged and interacting with the police is important. So the outcome of all that analysis were a set of 12 design considerations. I'm not going to go through them in this talk, but you can get a sense of the kind of areas that they cover, from the kind of privacy, policy, clarity issues, all the way to navigation and how messaging around apps should be designed when marketing them or publicizing them to different audiences. And you can read that in more detail in the paper itself. So there's a link on this slide here to a preprint version of the paper that we've written, which is currently under review and hopefully going to get published very soon. So that's really the research. Just in closing, I'd like to also acknowledge and give great thanks to colleagues in Thames Valley Police in Milton Keynes, Kelly Gardner and Mark Lacey, who helped us develop this work, review the manuscript, and gave us really good input to improving it into the final version that we're publishing. That's it. Thank you very much.